February 26, 1916. In the Malancourt forest, near the Verdun fortress, French soldiers of the 362nd Infantry Regiment huddled in their trenches. They were accustomed to artillery fire. They were accustomed to poison gas. But this morning, death presented a completely new face. A strange screeching sound came from the German trenches. It wasn't like a mortar shell. It sounded like the hiss of a giant pressure cooker. Then the French soldiers saw dark figures slowly approaching. On their backs were heavy metal containers. In their hands they held long black hoses, pointed straight ahead. "What the hell is that?" a French soldier whispered. And then the answer came. A stream of thick black liquid spurted from the hose, and in an instant, it transformed into a gigantic column of fire, more than 20 meters long. The roar of the flames drowned out the sound of gunfire. The terrible heat melted the snow on the ground instantly. The French soldiers on the front lines didn't have time to fire a single shot. They were burned alive. They screamed, but their screams were swallowed by the roar of the fire. Those in the rear watched their comrades turn into living torches, running wildly in panic, then falling into the black mud. This wasn't war. This was God's punishment. This was the first time the world witnessed the destructive power of the flamethrower, the flamethrower. Welcome to Brutal World War. Today, we'll talk about the most terrifying, most brutal, and most tragic weapon of World War I. A weapon created from German pride, but ending in utter misery. To understand why this weapon was created, we must go back in time a little. At the beginning of the 20th century, the German Empire was the pinnacle of military science and technology. They didn't want a protracted war in the trenches. They wanted absolute destruction to break the enemy's will. And the man behind this monster was Richard Fiedler. A German engineer with a crazy idea. Why should we fire bullet by bullet when we can wipe out an entire trench with a torrent of fire? In 1901, Fiedler demonstrated the first prototype to Emperor Wilhelm II. A column of fire erupted, incinerating the hypothetical target. The German emperor, who was always obsessed with military power, was instantly captivated. He saw in that fire the future of Germany. A special unit was formed, top secret. They didn't belong to the regular infantry. They were the pioneer, the vanguard engineering force. The symbol on their collars was a skull and crossbones Totenkopf, death. That was their identity. They were selected from the best firefighters, the best mechanics. They were trained to carry a 30-kilogram time bomb on their backs. It was a device called the Klein Flammenwerfer, light flamethrower. Its construction was simple, but deadly. A container of kerosene mixed with asphalt for viscosity. A container of compressed nitrogen gas for pressure. And an ignition device at the nozzle. When the trigger was pulled, the compressed gas pushed the oil out through the fuse, and boom! A fire dragon, 18 to 20 meters long, appeared. The Germans proudly called them the Knights, the Knights of Fire. They believed that with this weapon, no army in the world could stand. And in the early days, they were right. Back to the Malancourt forest. The appearance of flamethrowers didn't just inflict physical damage. It struck directly at humanity's most primal fears, the fear of being eaten alive, and the fear of being burned alive. In military history, soldiers could accept being hit by bullets. It was a quick death, or being hit by shrapnel. That was fate. But being burned alive, no one accepted that. When the Germans attacked Malancourt, their goal was to shock. They went in pairs. One man sprayed flames. The other held a rifle for protection. They advanced to the edge of the French trenches. They pointed the nozzles downwards. The liquid fire flowed down the trenches like a flood. It seeped into every nook and cranny, into every bunker. The burning oil clung to their clothes, to their skin. The French soldiers tried to put out the fire by rolling on the ground, but to no avail. This fire was specially formulated. It burned persistently and couldn't be extinguished with water. The psychological effect was devastating. The French soldiers in the nearby trenches, though not yet touched by the flames, threw down their weapons and fled. They would rather be shot in the back while running than stand and face that fiery monster. In just a few hours, a well-trained French regiment was completely annihilated. Not because they were cowardly, but because they were facing a weapon straight out of mythology. The German report that day recorded a chilling line. The enemy offered no resistance. They were paralyzed by fear. But behind the initial glory of victory, the German flamethrowers began to realize a bitter truth. They were knights, but they were also pawns. Look at the soldier carrying the flamethrower. He carries a 32-kilogram barrel of flammable fuel on his back. He has to walk. Slowly, lazily. He has to get very close to the enemy, only about 20 meters away, to fire. What does this turn him into? It turns him into a moving target, a walking barrel of gunpowder. At the Battle of Malancourt, although the French were in panic, there were still soldiers who returned fire, and they realized something interesting. They didn't need to shoot the German soldier. They only needed to shoot the barrel on his back. Just one bullet. A bullet that pierced the thin steel casing of the compressed nitrogen tank, or the oil tank. And the result was a horrific explosion. The flamethrower didn't die alone. He exploded, becoming a giant fireball, incinerating himself and his comrades standing around him. The initial pride gradually turned into fear. Other German infantrymen began to avoid the flamethrowers. They didn't want to go near these mobile gas stations. The flamethrower became isolated even within his own ranks. They were respected, but also shunned like carriers of disease. The attacks at Malancourt and Verdun were the pinnacle of flamethrower glory. It terrified the Allies. It led the British and French press to call the Germans the Huns. But war is a harsh teacher. Surprise only works once. The French and British didn't keep running away. They began to learn how to cope. They realized the deadly weakness of this fire dragon, its short range, and its slowness. They began giving orders to the snipers. Don't shoot at the head. Shoot at the barrel on the back. And they began developing new tactics to hunt down these hunters in return. Germany's proud weapon was about to enter its most disastrous phase. When the fire turned against its master, it would burn its own master. After the initial shock at Malancourt and Verdun, the Allies woke up. They realized that the German flamethrower wasn't immortal. It had a soft belly, very vulnerable, and a secret order, not written in official documents, but passed by word of mouth between the British and French trenches. Shoot the one carrying the barrel first. Ignore everyone else. Kill the flamethrower at all costs. The German flamethrowers, initially considered elite, now found themselves carrying a death sentence. They became magnets for bullets. Imagine you are a young German soldier. You are recruited into the Guards Reserve. You wear the Totenkopf skull badge on your sleeve. You are proud. But when you step onto the battlefield, you discover a horrifying truth. The moment you poked your head out of the trench, dozens of enemy guns were immediately pointed at you. They weren't shooting infantrymen with rifles. They were concentrating their firepower on you. Vickers machine guns, sniper rifles, even grenades. All of them wanted to blow up the fuel tank on your back. Why? Because of hatred. British and French soldiers considered flamethrowers an unsportsmanlike weapon. a cowardly act. They'd rather be shot dead than burned alive. So, they vented their anger on the men operating them. If a German infantryman raised his hands in surrender, he might be spared. But if a flamethrower raised his hands in surrender, usually, there was no mercy. They were often shot dead on the spot because of the brutality of their weapon. But the enemy on the other side of the trench wasn't the only threat. The greatest enemy was right on their backs. The early Klein flamethrower machine was a hasty design by the mad genius Richard Fiedler. It weighed nearly 32 kilograms when fully fueled. Imagine carrying a sack of cement and running across no man's land full of bomb craters and barbed wire. They couldn't run fast. They couldn't easily lie flat on the ground to avoid bullets because the tank was too bulky. They became slow turtles amidst a hail of bullets. And worse was the technical problem. The pressure valves of 1916 weren't perfect. They constantly leaked. Kerosene, mixed with sticky asphalt, seeped from the joints. It soaked into the soldiers' uniforms. It seeped into their skin. The flamethrowers always reeked of gasoline. They became like living candles. Just one accidentally dropped cigarette butt, or a small spark from a bullet grazing a belt buckle. Boom! The enemy didn't need to hit the fuel tank. They ignited themselves. And once the flames caught on their oil-soaked uniforms, nothing could extinguish them. Their comrades, the regular infantrymen, began to shun them. No one wanted to sit near this mobile explosive device in the bunker. The flamethrower was isolated. They ate alone, slept alone, and often died alone. One of the greatest tragedies, and a prime example of the failure of this weapon, occurred at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. A German flamethrower platoon was ordered to attack a British machine gun emplacement. They used the smokescreen to advance. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. The soldier leading the charge, named Hans, pulled the trigger. A stream of fire erupted, incinerating the British Vickers machine gun. But a stray bullet, perhaps from a Canadian sniper hiding in the bushes, flew through the air. The bullet pierced the thin steel casing of the compressed nitrogen tank on Hans's back. The immense pressure inside was suddenly released. It didn't just blow Hans up, it turned him into a napalm bomb. Burning oil splattered in a 15-meter radius. It hit his two supporting comrades right behind him. It hit the German infantrymen charging forward to take the trench. Instead of clearing the way for the Germans, Hans had inadvertently incinerated his own comrades. An entire German platoon was engulfed in flames right before victory. Heart-wrenching screams rang out, not screams of battle, but screams of utter agony. The British, from a passive position, suddenly witnessed the enemy's self-destruction. They opened fire on those burning shadows. It was a massacre. This event dealt a severe blow to the morale of the German army. They realized that carrying a flamethrower was like carrying a demon. It could kill the enemy, but it was also ready to turn around and devour its owner at any moment. After those humiliating defeats, the German command was forced to change. They no longer dared to use flamethrowers so openly and indiscriminately as they had at Malancourt. They called these units by a sarcastic nickname, Himmelfahrtskommando, which translates to Suicide Squad. The average lifespan of a flamethrower on the battlefield in 1916 was measured in minutes. From the moment they pulled the trigger for the first time until they were shot down, it was only about 5 to 10 minutes. They had to change tactics. Instead of marching forward, they had to crawl. They had to use bomb craters to approach their targets. They were only allowed to fire a short burst, then immediately discard the equipment and flee. But the price was still too high. To destroy an enemy bunker, the Germans often had to sacrifice 2 to 3 flamethrower teams, equivalent to 6 to 9 lives, in exchange for a machine gun. A losing trade. The pride in the miracle weapon vanished. Instead, fear prevailed. Many German soldiers began to evade this mission. They would rather be imprisoned than carry that death tank on their backs. The Germans unleashed their monster. And now, the British decided to raise their own. But the British, with their pragmatic and cold nature, didn't want to make small portable toys. They wanted something capable of mass destruction. The man behind this insane project was Captain William Levens. Levens wasn't an ordinary soldier. He was a civilian engineer, harboring a deep-seated hatred. His fiancée was believed to have been on board the Lusitania sunk by a German submarine. Levens vowed to create a weapon that would make the Germans regret starting this war. He looked at the German flamethrower. 20-meter range, too short. 10-liter tank, too little. Easily blown up, too weak. Levens wanted a real dragon, a Leviathan. And so, in the secret workshops of London, the Levens Large Gallery Flame Projector was born. In simpler terms, a large underground flamethrower. It wasn't a gun. It was a construction. It was 17 meters long, weighed 2.5 tons. The nozzle diameter was 35 centimeters. It didn't use conventional compressed air. It used a gigantic hydraulic piston, like the jack of a heavy-duty truck. Levens' goal was simple. No need for soldiers to run to the surface to spew flames. He wanted to bury this monster underground, right beneath the German trenches. And when the time came, the ground would crack open, and hell would erupt. But how to get a 2.5-ton machine, as long as a train car, right up to the German lines without being detected? The answer lay in the miners' sappers. At the Somme front in 1916, hundreds of meters underground, a silent war was underway. British Royal Engineers were digging secret tunnels galleries toward the German lines. They worked in complete darkness. No noisy machinery was allowed, only pickaxes and shovels. They had to be absolutely silent, because right above them, just meters above German soldiers were moving about. The Germans also had geophones. One loud noise and the Germans would drop mines, burying everyone alive. In that cramped, suffocating, oxygen-deprived space, they dismantled the Levens monster piece by piece. They transported each bolt, each oil pipe, each compressed air tank underground. Then they reassembled them right inside the tunnel. It was a feat of engineering and a logistical nightmare. They pumped hundreds of liters of kerosene mixed with diesel fuel into the monster's belly. They awaited the day of the attack. July 1st, 1916. The bloodiest day in British military history. The morning of July 1st, 1916. Fog enveloped the Somme Valley. Thousands of British soldiers awaited the charge whistle. They knew German machine guns were ahead. They knew they were about to die. But at exactly 7:30 a.m. in the Mametz area, something strange happened. The ground shook. Not from artillery. From a gaping hole blasted open in the ground, about 80 meters from the German trenches. A roar erupted, like the sound of a modern jet engine, and then a gigantic column of fire appeared. It wasn't like the small sparks of the German soldiers. It was as big as a building. It spewed, not 20 meters, but 100 meters over 300 feet. Imagine you're a German soldier defending a fortified concrete bunker. You're confident your machine gun can wipe out the British soldiers. And suddenly, the sky turns orange. A stream of molten lava crashes down on you from a distance of hundreds of meters. The heat is so intense, even British soldiers 200 meters behind feel their eyebrows scorched. It engulfs the entire German first line of defense. It roasts the German soldiers inside their concrete bunkers. No one escaped, because the rate of eruption was too fast. In 10 seconds, it had spewed out almost a ton of fuel. The sight was so terrifying. The British soldiers, who should have charged, were frozen in place. They stared in awe at the great hell unfolding before their eyes. They even forgot how to shoot. The effectiveness of the Livens machine was absolute. Wherever it was used, the Germans either burned to death or surrendered instantly in utter panic. They knelt, trembling, their eyes wide with fear at the gaping, fire-spitting pit. They thought the British had opened the gates of hell. However, this was a one-hit wonder weapon. After expending all its fuel, the machine became a useless pile of scrap metal. It couldn't move. It couldn't reload quickly. And if the German counterfire hit the underground bunker, tons of oil below would turn the British miners themselves into ashes. Only 4 such machines were deployed at the Somme. 2 of them were destroyed by German artillery before they could fire. Only 2 were operational. But those 2 machines became legendary. After the battle, the British secretly filled in the tunnels. They buried these monsters. They didn't want the Germans to know about this technology. And for almost a century, the existence of the Livens flame projector was considered a rumor. It wasn't until 2010 that archaeologists found the remains of such a machine deep underground in France. 1917. World War I was entering its decisive phase. The German army was exhausted. They no longer had enough manpower to maintain their massive artillery positions. They needed speed, they needed mobility, and they needed a new kind of firepower. Abandoning the cumbersome designs of the early war, German engineers created a masterpiece of compact destruction. It was called the Wechselapparat M, 1917. Unlike the square water barrels of the past, the Wex had a peculiar shape. It resembled a round life-buoy donut shape. With a small sphere in the middle, it was lighter, only about 24 kilograms. It was safer, and it was designed specifically for a new type of soldier, those dubbed soldiers of the future. These were the Stoßtruppen, stormtroopers. These soldiers didn't sit waiting in trenches. They attacked in small groups. They weaved through the barbed wire fence, and on the back of the leader, always the Wex. Imagine the scene in 1918. In the thick fog of mustard gas, ghostly figures wearing gas masks suddenly appeared at the entrances to Allied bunkers. No warning, no artillery preparation, just a hiss. Boom! The flame from the Wex, shorter, but more concentrated. It wiped out a bunker in just 3 seconds. The German soldiers no longer stood to observe the result. They spewed flames, and they ran. They turned the battlefield into a dance of fire and death. The Wex became a symbol of new fear. It was Germany's last desperate attempt to break the stalemate with technology. But 1918 also marked the entry of a new power, the United States. The Americans arrived late, but they brought with them a brutal, pragmatic mindset. They saw the German flamethrowers. They weren't as fearful as the French in 1916. They responded with a common weapon, but one that was surprisingly effective: a shotgun, specifically a Winchester Model 1897. The American soldiers called it the trench broom. This was a classic confrontation in military history, fire versus lead. The German flamethrower needed to get within 20 meters, but the American soldier with the shotgun could blow him away from 30 meters. A shotgun blast contained 9 large lead pellets, 00 buckshot. It didn't require precise aiming. As the German soldier raised his head to pull the trigger of the flamethrower, bang! Dozens of lead pellets flew out. They not only tore apart the German soldier's body, they ripped through the round fuel tank on his back. The result was a chain reaction explosion. A German flamethrower exploded right in his own trench, incinerating the entire stormtrooper squad. Germany was so terrified of the shotgun that they sent a diplomatic protest, calling it an inhuman weapon and threatening to execute any American soldier carrying one. Ironically, the nation that invented poison gas and flamethrowers was lamenting the inhumanity of a shotgun. When infantry carrying flamethrowers became too vulnerable, the great powers began to think about armoring them. The Germans had the A7V tank, a clumsy mobile metal box. But the French and British, they went further. They fitted enormous fuel tanks inside the tanks. Imagine the horror of the German infantry in the final days of the war. They hid in fortified concrete bunkers. Their machine guns fired hopelessly at the steel armor of enemy tanks. And then, that tank wouldn't fire. It lowered its gun barrel into the embrasure, and it spewed fire. Not a brief spark of infantry fire, but a continuous river of flames lasting for minutes. Fuel was pumped by powerful engines. These tanks turned the bunkers into toaster ovens. No one could survive. No one could surrender. The temperature inside the bunker rose to 1,000 degrees Celsius. The air was sucked out. German soldiers suffocated before being burned to death. The weapons Germany had once proudly created now turned against them, crushing them on an industrial scale. It was the punishment of fate. November 1918. The gunfire ceased. Germany lost the war. Thousands of flamethrowers lay abandoned by the roadside, rusted, dented. They became worthless piles of scrap metal, but the fate of those who operated them was even more tragic. The soldiers of the Skull Unit returned home. They were not welcomed as heroes. They were seen as criminals. In the eyes of the enemy, they were monsters. In the eyes of their comrades, they were harbingers of misfortune. And in their own souls, they were cursed. They carried with them a particular type of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that psychologists of the time couldn't name. It was the obsession with the smell of burning meat. Many of the flamethrowers could never eat grilled meat again. They couldn't sit near a fireplace. Every time they saw the flame of a matchstick, they heard the screams of the French soldiers in the Malancourt forest all those years ago. They saw the melted faces of their comrades blown up right beside them. They survived the war, but their souls had long been consumed by fire. Many of them committed suicide in the 1920s. They used guns. They used ropes. But no one chose self-immolation, because they understood all too well the price of fire. The story of the flamethrower in World War I is a tragedy of human ambition. From Richard Fiedler's arrogant pride before the German emperor, to the horrors at Verdun, to the burning graves at the Somme, and ending with the humiliating defeat of 1918. It taught humanity a costly lesson. We can build machines to kill each other more effectively. We can condense fire into steel cylinders. But we can never control its impact on the human soul. Flame guns continued to be used in World War II and Vietnam. But the innocence and pride in them died with the German Empire in 1918. When you see a flame, remember that it doesn't just bring warmth. It's a sleeping monster. And those who awaken it will pay with their own souls. Thank you for joining Brutal World War in this 4-part series on the most terrifying weapon in history. Cherish peace. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the brutal hidden aspects of war. I am Brutal World War. Goodbye, and see you again.